Hey guys, it's past midnight, where the stories get darker and the air gets heavier. If you're new here, hi, I'm Jennifer, and on this channel we talk about scary, spooky, quirky, and sometimes tragic history. So if you're into that, stick around because today's story is really horrifying and twisted, but it is a survival story, and I don't think we've had a happy ending on this channel yet. So grab a blanket and turn the lights down because we'll be talking about Colleen Stan, a woman who endured 7 years of captivity in a box. So let me take you back to May 19th, 1977. Colleen Stan is a 20-year-old from Eugene, Oregon. She's free-spirited, adventurous, which I feel like screams Oregon for some reason, and a little naive, like most of us that age. She decides to hitchhike to visit a friend in Northern California for her birthday party. Now, I know what you're thinking, hitchhiking in the 70s, big yikes. But back then, it was pretty common. Still, Colleen was cautious. She said she turned down a couple of the rides that didn't feel right until she finally hopped into a blue Dodge Colt with a young couple, Cameron and Janice Hooker. And here's the thing, Cameron and Janice seemed normal. They had a baby in the back seat, so Colleen felt that she could trust these people. But the second she got into that car, her life would change forever. So she gets in and they're driving along Interstate 5 when they decide to stop at a gas station. Colleen went to use the bathroom, and it's at this point she said she felt like this eerie dread come over her. And she recalled that a voice seemed to tell her to run and never look back. So she had a little anxiety, but she managed to calm herself down and return to the car. Gut feelings can be a strange thing. About 20 minutes into their drive, Cameron exited the highway, claiming he wanted to check out some nearby caves. According to Colleen, this is when Janice gets out the car with her baby and they go down to a lake that's nearby. They were playing by the water and she was just watching this when suddenly Cameron jumps into the back seat and holds a knife to her neck and forces her into a homemade wooden contraption, essentially a head box that completely restrained her and silenced her. So one moment she's heading to a party and the next she's in a contraption completely at the mercy of a stranger. That's the worst about these true crime stories, because one small choice can completely change the trajectory and land you in a dire situation. Like, you just can't even imagine it. And what if she was claustrophobic? Because what do you mean a box? Now, here's the thing about Cameron and Janice. Before all of this, they made an agreement. When I was researching them, there wasn't much information on Cameron and there was even less of Janice. But he was born in Alturas, California on November 5th, 1953. His family always moved around until they finally decided to settle in Red Bluff in 1969 when he was already 16. Cameron would go on to graduate in 1972, where he would go on to work at a lumber mill, which is where he remained. He met Janice the next year, and Janice was only 15 at the time. Guys, he was 19. She was abused by her family, and she had no real relationships before Cameron. As a result, she wasn't the strongest person, and she enters into a sub-dom relationship with Cameron. And he introduced her to bondage and sadomasochism. I hope I'm allowed to say that on YouTube. It said that he almost even drowned her in one of their sessions, and his favorite activity consisted of suspending Janice by her wrists, fully nude, and using a whip on her. Well, they go on to get married. This is around the time when Cameron reveals to Janice that he has plans to abduct a stranger and force her into sexual slavery so he could have a menage a trois. Janice, I guess she goes along with it, but she adds some conditions. He wouldn't whip Janice anymore because I don't think she was into it. Like, she did all of this for Cameron, and also she wanted to eventually have babies down the line. So she wanted to have these pregnancies safe and stress-free. So he was only allowed to whip the sexual slave, and he would only have penetrative sex with Janice. Those were her terms and conditions. And so those are the hookers. So on the first night of her abduction, Colleen was bound, assaulted by Cameron, and left suspended by her wrists and blindfolded. And they left her like this while Cameron and Janice engaged in sexual acts beneath her. And that's just the beginning of it. Over the next few months, Cameron made it his mission to torture Colleen daily. And when I say torture, I mean the whole medieval package. Whipping, shocking her with electricity, starving her, and he even had this, like, once again, homemade rack to stretch her out. No words. By the end of the first month, she had already lost 22 pounds. And that just goes on to show you how much her body had to go through, because I didn't even know that that was physically possible. Oh, and she wasn't even allowed to bathe until August. Again, she was abducted in May. So she was tortured, and they would keep her in a coffin-like box for up to 23 hours a day, completely cut off from the outside world. By January 1978, so the following year, Cameron had coerced her into signing this so-called slave contract, binding her to him in what he claimed was lifelong servitude. Around this time, during those long hours of isolation, she had this little tiny opening in the box where she could occasionally catch a glimpse of the outside world. One day, while she was peering outside that small gap, she sees a photograph of a woman, Marie Elizabeth Spanhank. Turns out Marie had been one of Cameron's previous victims, and her body was never found. So she just solved a mystery right there from that box. But also for Colleen, this photograph reinforced the terrifying reality of her situation. It was a visual reminder that Cameron was capable of murder and that she might never escape alive. Now, this likely heightened her fear of the company, which made her even more compliant. But what exactly was the company, you might ask? Well, to add another level of psychological torment, because it wasn't already enough for Cameron, he plants this idea in Colleen's head that she's being watched by some secretive, all-powerful organization called the Company. He claimed that the Company infiltrated every level of government, industry, law enforcement, and the judicial system. They exploited women for pleasure and profit, and used advanced technology to monitor their every move to make sure that they didn't escape or go and alert the public. Any attempt to do so would result in immediate retaliation against the women and their families. Now that was key here, because AKA he told her if she tried to escape or even step out of line, the company would hurt her family or worse. I mean, the psychological manipulation was to another level. At this point, Cameron stripped her of her whole identity and starts referring to her as K, like the letter K, and demands that he refer to him as master. She wasn't even allowed to speak unless she got permission. Oh, and get this, Cameron, in his twisted ass mind, decided that Colleen should model herself after the female character in Story of O, an erotic French novel that had some controversy around it, because I think that's where he got his ideas of having a sex slave and all of that. Because at this point, they were allowing her to come out of the box sometimes, and she was just doing like maid work around the house, naked. And around this time, he also begins sexually assaulting her. But remember his little pact and sick agreement with Janice, he wasn't allowed to have full-on intercourse with her, so instead he used implements. And he does this until he finally decides to break that pact and lie to Janice and has sexual intercourse with Colleen. So the hookers moved to a mobile home in Red Bluff, California, and Colleen was locked in a wooden box under their waterbed. Yeah, under the bed where Colleen and Janice would sleep. And to make this nightmare even more surreal, Janice gave birth to their second child in 1978, literally right above Colleen, while she was locked in that box. I mean, the layer of twistedness. Like they were just living their lives while she just existed down there. I don't know, it's just so weird. But over some time, something started to shift in Colleen. Stockholm syndrome. For those unfamiliar, it's a complex psychological response where a victim forms a bond with their captor, relying on them for survival and even a sense of comfort. In Colleen's case, she began to develop an emotional dependence on Cameron. She was caught in an agonizing conflict. Should she risk everything to escape or focus solely on surviving? Now, I think that's important to address because of the next part that's coming up. To avoid Cameron's wrath, she complied with his demands, and this would sometimes win her some perks, like jogging, working in the yard, or even helping him build these new spaces for future sex slaves. But here's where it's a little messed up, because despite having access to an open door, neighbors, and even a phone, Colleen never tried to escape. Her fear of the company and maybe a little bit of that Stockholm syndrome that we just talked about kept her frozen. It was a sickening cycle that kept her locked for years. In the summer of 1980, she was no longer confined to the small box, but she was made to sleep on the bathroom floor, chained to the toilet. By the end of the year, she was allowed to, wait for it, call her family, telling them she was working as a nanny for a kind couple she had met on the road. In March 1981, Cameron even takes her to visit her grandmother and her parents, where she would introduce him as her boyfriend. She even stayed overnight at her mother's house before Cameron returned to pick her up in the morning. Now, this might be as shocking to you as it was to me, because why wasn't that the end, right? Why didn't her family save her? Well, Colleen's family did think something was off, but they didn't want to push too hard. See, they assumed that maybe she had joined a cult or something, and they were worried that if they pressured her or pushed too hard, she might cut ties with them completely, and then they would never see their daughter again. And I'm no parent, but I can definitely sympathize with that. So her family, trying to make sense of it all, probably convinced themselves that everything was fine. And this is a sick, twisted part. They even took a picture of Colleen and Cameron smiling together. And I hope I can find the picture, but what a haunting image to look back on now that everyone knows the truth. But Cameron wasn't done, not by a long shot. He saw that Colleen was getting a little too comfortable, a little too free. So what does he do? He puts her right back in the box under the same conditions from the beginning. And for the next 3 years, she stayed there. 23 hours a day. She had to use a bedpan for her bodily functions and only ate scraps of food. Meanwhile, Cameron told his kids, because she was nannying them and helping take care of them sometimes, that Kay had gone home. But when they were asleep, he'd pull Colleen out of that box to feed her and torture her. Now here's when things start to shift. In 1983, Colleen was given a little more freedom, and she was allowed to rejoin the children and neighbors, and even started working as a maid at a local hotel. But Cameron, he wanted even more. He wanted Colleen to become his second wife. Now, that was a tipping point for Janice. Some people would argue that Janice had been through the same psychological torment that Colleen had. She had been brainwashed, manipulated, and coerced into going along with Cameron's plan. But she started to feel something different. She ended up finding out about Cameron lying to her and breaking their pact, and now he wanted to make her a second wife. So she started feeling something different. That green-eyed monster, jealousy. She was jealous of the attention that Cameron was giving Colleen. But that jealousy, that was key in Colleen's escape. But we'll get to that in a second, just wait. After years of torment, cracks started to form in Cameron's control. Through all of this, Janice and Colleen actually, built a relationship. She said that sometimes Jan, that's what she referred to her as, would let her out of the box and they would read the Bible together. So in 1984, Janice can't take it anymore and finally tells Colleen that the company, it isn't real. That didn't exist, and there was no seer organization. That was the moment that Colleen realized that she could just leave. And that's exactly what she did. She got up and left and never looked back. Now, Janice, she didn't stop there. She was fuming with years of pent-up guilt and resentment towards Cameron, determined to end his reign of terror because, I mean, this wasn't his first time. And if you include Janice, it's technically his third time. But she decides to fully cooperate with the authorities. Janice provided a detailed testimony that would fully expose the extent of Cameron's crimes, from the psychological manipulation to the horrific abuse that Colleen endured, and her cooperation was instrumental in building a case against him. When Colleen's story became public, it sent shockwaves across the nation. The sheer brutality and bizarre nature of her captivity left people horrified and captivated in equal measure. During the trial, Cameron Hooker was convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault and was sentenced to 104 years, ensuring that he would never harm anyone else. As for Janice, she was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, which didn't sit well with everyone. Some believed that she deserved punishment for her role in Colleen's suffering, while others saw her as another victim of Cameron's control. Like I said, that's up for debate, but regardless, her actions were crucial in bringing him to justice and ending Colleen's nightmare once and for all. After escaping, Colleen struggled to rebuild her life. I mean, how do you even begin to heal from something like that? I mean, she was young when she was kidnapped, and then 7 years with your captors. So she changed her name, went to therapy, and did her best to move forward, taking her power back. Colleen actually co-authored a book about her ordeal titled The Simple Gifts of Life in 2009. The book provides her personal insights into the psychological and physical abuse, if you guys are interested in learning more, as well as her journey towards healing and rebuilding her life after her escape. It's a powerful account of survival and resilience. And Cameron, he's still in prison today, but he was up for parole in 2021. Sickening, but he was denied and will likely remain behind bars for the rest of his life. So what do we make of all of this? Colleen's story is a haunting reminder of human cruelty and manipulation, but it's also a testament to her strength and resilience. She survived 7 years of torture and then rebuilt her life. I mean, that's nothing short of extraordinary. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Oh, also, side note, I'm not in love with my background right now, but we are moving soon, so stay tuned and how I change up that space. Well, anyways, till next time, stay safe. Bye, guys.